Okay, today we're going to talk about James Bond. And particularly, we're going to look at the way in which the films reflect the dominant ideology of the time. And we're going to concentrate on attitudes towards gender. I say gender, we're primarily looking at the role of females in his films. Remember, of course, that dominant ideology, the values, beliefs, opinions which circulate at any one time and in any one place is the key term here. In other words, we are expecting to see, since 1962 when the first film came out to 2016, we're expecting to see changes because obviously there have been, there's a revolution in the way women are perceived in society, and we expect to see that in the films. Let's have a look at the early films. And we're talking about 1962. We're particularly looking at Dr. No, which was the first film, and the terms that really spring to mind are misogynist, which means female-hating, actually, and chauvinistic, which means treating women as inferiors. So those two things are quite important, and not just treating them as inferiors, by the way, but treating them as sex objects, giving them highly stereotypical roles and positions in society. And we can talk about Laura Mulvey's idea here, which is that cinema is male and women are perceived through men's eyes. And certainly the opening shots of Dr. No would reveal that. We've got James Bond on the beach, having a little snooze, and Ursula Andress, who plays the character Honey Rider, we'll come back to that later, comes out of the beach. This is a key moment in Bond films, really. It was the moment when it became clear that these films were basically almost soft porn for the time. And I think that is a key part of their attraction, that for males, they represent looking at girls without many clothes on. Let's be honest about it. And in that sense, we can see these films as almost like pornographic. What's interesting is the way we're seeing him looking. And of course, he's looking in the same way as the audience are looking. He's encouraging us to look. He's our role model. He's saying this is okay to stare at naked women. Anyway, we'll move on from there. And now we'll look at some of the names and how that reflects how they're seen as sex objects. I am not going to discuss wordplay. There she is, Honey Rider, and this is the one that always makes me laugh, played by Honor Blackman, Pussy Galore. Okay, and now, there is a lot of violence against women in these films, but I'm not going to show any of those clips now. Because I can't find any, and also I don't think it's very nice. I think what's key here in these early films is the female is seen as the prize. So think of Prop. The seeker hero, the hero, the protagonist, Bond, goes on a quest, according to Prop, with his magic implement. Of course, he has many of those. His car, cigarette lighters, watches, etc., that do all sorts of strange things. But he defeats the villain, and for a reward, he gets the princess. And that is very much the structure of every single Bond film. And I'll go on to show, not just in the first phase, but also later on in what I'm calling the second two phases of the Bond story. The Spy Who Loved Me, very important, out in 1977. And we've got the very beautiful Barbara Bach, playing, what's interesting, a Bond's equivalent. So we are seeing a modern, strong female who has exactly the same rank as him, a major. He's a commander in the Navy, which is the same rank. And she's competent, she's independent, and what's most important, I think, more than all of those factors, because you've seen elements of that in some of the earlier Bond girls, but it's her storyline is essential to the film. She's not an add-on. It's her story. So her narrative strand intertwines with that of Bond's. So she's got some sort of democratic narratival parity with Bond. I like that phrase. So after this, all the female leads, it was a success, are now intrinsic to the plot. And of course, this massively increases the audience for Bond films. It's no longer just soft porn, that's still in there to an extent. However, females can watch it and actually see themselves and find relatable characters. However, the female's still weaker. Bond has to rescue her and is always placed as someone one step ahead of her. She's still attractive and she does end up, well, we don't need to talk about that, do we? Third phase. Now, it's not just Spectre. I'm looking at Spectre, but some of the films that led into Spectre, and there's sort of a little group of films among themselves, Casino Royale, etc., with the introduction of, I think after M, played by Judi Dench, is key, that there is a big change. And the change is not so much in women. It's almost understood that women are equals. The female lead is a scientist, Dr. Madeleine Swann. And you can see there that she is presented as a sort of glamorous, beautiful girl in many parts of the film, but other times she's presented as a sort of gender-free almost, which is quite refreshing. And there she is again with a gun. Interestingly, she eschews violence. She doesn't like violence. She doesn't like guns, and Bond has to persuade her to use the gun, which I think is sort of interesting in some ways. However, despite the fact that her plot line is important and is the main plot line in a sense, she's still typical. She doesn't really like violence. She is a very modern sort of person and does not agree with shooting people, etc. She still has to be rescued. She still is prized sexually, and she's still very beautiful. So there are differences, but there are still consistent themes throughout Bond films. But here's a big one. I think really this is about the fact that men have undergone change in society after the 90s. Men are more reflective, emotionally honest, emotionally literate, etc. Bond actually puts her before his job, and his relationship with her is more equal. It's more complex than we've seen before. It isn't really just about sex at all. And he lets her in to his life and tells her all about his past. Paste. And that is very key. So we're starting to see men becoming more complex, nuanced, subtle characters which have layers of identity, not simply that of a simple, rugged superhero rugged hero that we see in the early Bond manifestations. Okay, I hope you find that interesting.